Welcome back, everyone. This is Conflicts of Interest, episode number 327. I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. I have a lot to talk about in today's show. I've been doing a lot of writing for the Libertarian Institute, so just want to remind people that if they would like to support my work, the best thing to do is to head on over to the Libertarian Institute just about every day to check out all the great stuff that we have posted over there. It's not just Conflicts of Interest, the podcast. It's articles, news stories. I've been trying to do 2-3 every night, so I have a bunch to talk about on today's show. One of the ways that you could get the news articles that I write for the Libertarian Institute is by signing up for Substack. Even if you're just a free, put your email into Substack. I'll just make sure you get those news articles in your inbox every day. So libertarianinstitute.substack.com for that. Support the show. The best way to do it is by sharing. And if you want to do a little bit extra, help out the show and help out yourself, think about doing your CBD shopping with Paloma Verde. That is the show's sponsor and has been for about 2 years now. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE. The Oblars run an absolutely fantastic business at Paloma Verde. Like I said, we've been partnered with them for 2 years. I have never talked to a customer who used our promo code that says, I really didn't like the products I got from Paloma Verde. Everybody gives me positive feedback. And part of that is just because, they run a quality business. They, for the longest time, had the lab test results from all their CBD products right on their website. If you have any questions, email, call. They're extremely helpful. They will get you the CBD products that you want. And when you use the promo code PEACE, those products are at a really good price. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. Just want to again put a call out to my audience since we were the top affiliate for Paloma Verde in August. I know we did a lot of sales that month, and so if you have been buying some Paloma Verde products through that promo code, the PEACE promo code, please hit up myself, Connor, Will Porter, the Conflicts of Interest account, and just let us know how that product's working for you. We want to be able to bring some more testimonials to the show. But now let's get into the articles. We have a lot to talk about today. The first article is from myself at the Libertarian Institute on September 19th. U.S. troops more concerned about inflation than Russia and China. According to the head of the Air Force, U.S. troops reported their top concern is inflation, not Russia or China. The concern from troops led the Pentagon to reverse a decision to cut special pay incentives for more complex jobs. The Federal Reserve reported that year-over-year inflation remained above 8% in August. And I'm sure quite a bit of my audience, falls into the general middle class like myself, maybe, the lower end of it or something. And certainly that 8% is what we're feeling. Food prices increased by 1% in August. That was certainly the case around here. I felt like it was quite a bit more, especially for some of those staples like, any kind of proteins that you really want to be able to buy. And the Fed officials decided to increase the interest rate by 0.75% at each of the past two meetings, and they are expected to increase the borrowing rate again. Increasing the interest rate to lower inflation has proven to be a double-edged sword for middle-class soldiers and all middle-class Americans looking to buy a home. Mortgage rates are topping 6% for the first time since 2008. Air Force Chief Frank Kendall says he has been speaking with a lot of enlisted Americans, and the top concern is rising prices, not being killed by another army during war. The most common concerns I've heard from airmen and air guardsmen about are inflation, housing costs, or conditions, and childcare, Kendall said. He continued, the past several months of inflation has put unique pressure on the finances of some of our eminent guardians and critical specialists. So, this I think really applies to pretty much all Americans who make probably under $75,000, $60,000, maybe even $100,000 a year if you are in some of these like coastal areas that are a little bit more expensive. But overall, this is really difficult for everyone, not just soldiers. But good that somebody is noticing it and taking note that look, what Americans need isn't great power competition with Russia and China China. It's, to get our spending under control, so this could be slowed down. The Department of Defense says it will help troops by not going through with plans to cut some soldier special pay for more difficult jobs. The program pays troops additional money. The White House has attempted to claim that rising costs are due to Russia's war in Ukraine. However, inflation was spiking before President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion. Additionally, most economic disruptions were not caused by war, but by Western sanctions designed to destroy Moscow's economy. So far, the White House has led economic war on the Kremlin has largely backfired. Americans and Westerners are suffering from inflation while the ruble has hit 7-year highs this summer. Europeans have seen energy prices spike to historic highs that are destroying businesses. I have an article here linked that's about a UK, all the pubs going out of businesses there because of high energy prices, but you could find this all over Europe. I think Germany's really rough right now. Rather than seeking to curb government spending or to reduce the money supply, the Joe Biden administration has pushed several massive spending bills through Congress. In May, the president signed a $40 billion aid bill for Ukraine into law and is now seeking an additional $14 billion for Kiev. The 2023 defense spending bill is a record at over $850 billion. If you hear clearly what the American troops are saying, they are the ones who would first face a foreign conflict. They are the ones who more than likely war with Russia in Ukraine, war with China in Taiwan, war with Iran, war with North Korea, war with Venezuela. These are the people who are most likely to be killed, and they're saying, I'm far more concerned about my bills. This should be a huge wake-up call to the White House, but it doesn't seem to be getting through, and we really show that this is true among the American people in general with this article that I wrote with Connor Freeman on September 20th at the Libertarian Institute titled Polls. The Americans oppose increasing Ukraine aid defending global democracy. Two new polls from Morning Consult and Concerned Veterans for America shows at least a plurality of Americans are tired of interventionism. The results show that twice as many Americans want to send less aid to Ukraine than those who support sending more. Meanwhile, only 17% of Americans are concerned about defending democracy around the globe. The Joe Biden White House built its foreign policy around the idea the world will move away from fighting wars against terrorists in the Middle East and focus on the Department of Defense great power competition. The administration marketed the policy as autocracy versus democracy, with the White House leading Western nations against Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and other ostensibly bad countries. While the White House has faced some criticism for claiming to promote democracy and selling weapons to brutal tyrants in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and apartheid Israel, the Morning Consult poll released last week shows the White House idea of promoting democracy is also not resonating with the American people. The poll asked Americans about their opinions on the country's most pressing foreign policy challenges. Only 17% of the respondents told the pollsters that upholding global democracy was among their top 5 concerns, ranking 11th behind drugs, climate, immigration, terrorism, and economic crisis. And so, especially when you look at the economic crisis, and I think that largely the drug issue is kind of downstream of the economic crisis. There are going to be people who use drugs, who overdose, even if you have a thriving, good economy with lots of, opportunities and everything like that. But I think we, seen very clearly through a lot of studies on drugs that one of the main things that drives people to use drugs in, to a rate where it's become an addiction and problematic is when there is a lack of other opportunity. And so, I think that's driving there. Now, interesting note here that 61% of Americans name terrorism as their top concern, including a huge number of Democrats. And so I think that's important to note because the Biden's White House whole foreign policy has kind of been based around this idea that we're no longer fighting terrorism, we're fighting the great power competition, and 50% of Americans are, 50% more Americans are about concern with terrorism than the White House's new direction. The poll was backed by another from Concerned Veterans for America that found U.S. citizens do not want increased involvement in Ukraine. Only 15% of Americans support sending more military aid and financial aid to Ukraine than wealthy European countries. Almost twice as many people, 34%, wanting to send less assistance, CVA wrote in their write-up on their polling. Additionally, a majority of Americans only want to send assistance to continue if Europeans match the American commitment. And so, look, only 15% of Americans want to send more, 34% want less, and 50% say we'll send the same amount if the Europeans are matching it, which they're not going to do. The Americans have sent 5, 6, 7 times more than the entirety of the Europeans combined so far. They're never going to catch up with that. And so basically what you have is about 85% of Americans trying to tell the White House, we are done with this. We're not going to support Ukraine when Europe isn't. The poll shows Americans are firmly opposed to American intervention in Ukraine. Over 55% of respondents oppose direct military intervention, while only 14% support fighting a war for Kiev. The results for Ukraine were similar to Americans wanting a scaled-back role in the world, with 42% of respondents saying they want a smaller role and only 7% saying they want more intervention. So I think in a lot of ways, we do have a lot of good news here from these polling results. Just, want to note maybe and say the White House doesn't listen to polling. Is this crazy thing, right? Where the White House's whole rationale for everything they do in this world is promoting democracy. And then when the majority of Americans want something, they completely ignore it to wage more war. All right. Next up, talk about this article that Dave DeCamp wrote, and it's a little bit of I think an inside baseball article, but I think it's going to impact this show. Myself, Connor Friedman, Dave DeCamp, people who really try to look at American foreign policy are going to find that just a little bit more difficult now. The State Department stops publishing military expenditures and arms transfer reports. This from Dave DeCamp at September 19th at antiwar.com. The State Department announced in August that it will no longer publish world military expenditures and arms transfer reports. WMEAT, WMEAT is the name of these reports, which have been released by the U.S. government since the 1960s. The WMEAT details U.S. global military spending, arms transfers, and the related data for each country in the world. The 2022 NDAA, that's the National Defense Authorization Act, the Pentagon spending bill, included an amendment that repealed the 1994 provision requiring the State Department to publish the WMEAT each year. Section 5114B4 of the NDAA fiscal year 2022 repealed the 1994 statutory provision that required the State Department to publish an edition of WMEAT every year. Consistent with this repeal, the State Department will cease to produce and publish WMEAT, the State Department wrote on its website. The State Department said that the report it published in 2021 was the final edition of WMEAT. The 2021 WMEAT covered an 11-year period from 2009 to 2019 and found that the U.S. was by far the world's largest arms dealer. During that period, 79% of the world's trade appeared to have been supplied by the United States. The discontinuation of WMEAT reports will reduce U.S. government transparency, comes as the U.S. is shipping billions of weapons to Ukraine with virtually no oversight. Now, I think fortunately we still have SPARI, that is the Stockholm Institute for Peace and something else, who puts out these reports on global arms trade from a little bit of a more third-party perspective. But, as an American, we really should be demanding that our government releases all these reports so we have, as much information as possible. That's supposed to be, transparency is supposed to be key to maintaining democracy. And that's not, libertarian. That's supposed to be the position of people who promote democracy. All right. Next article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute. The White House is making a quiet effort at closing America's infamous torture prison. President Joe Biden has pushed behind the scenes throughout the first year of his administration to close the Guantanamo Bay torture prison, the Wall Street Journal reports. Established in U.S.-occupied Cuba under the George W. Bush presidency, Gitmo has a cruel legacy of American carrying out barbaric interrogation methods on mostly innocent people. Set up in January 2002, the prison population is down to 36 from over 800. Each detainee costs American taxpayers about $15 million per year. However, many of the detainees the U.S. government has in legal limbo. If taken to court, the methods used by the CIA's torture program could become more public. Both Biden and his Democrat predecessor, Barack Obama, pledged to close the gulag. And so this is the pickle that the White House is in. Almost everybody who's in Gitmo and who's actually guilty of something that, we're still concerned about 20 years later, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's accused of planning 9/11, being the top planner, and people surrounding him, there's like 5 of them. They really can't prosecute them because as part of the prosecution, the defense will bring up, well, he made that comment under torture. And, then they'll have to talk about the torture methods. And they clearly don't want that to be made public. And so rather than, this making us safe, what George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and the rest of the Bush administration did during this time with the torture program, while they claimed it was about making us safe, making sure that nobody's going to attack us, we found out that interrogation in this method, torturing people, particularly when you're torturing some people to death, is not going to produce good information. It's not going to produce good intelligence. It essentially just has these people telling you what you want to hear, so you can't count on it at all. But the alternative is it just completely destroyed our justice system and any semblance that this country had that there's any kind of rule of law. We can't prosecute the people who carried out the most horrific crime on American soil ever. Right? Like in the past, when terrorists have carried out acts like the first Twin Tower bombing, those people were arrested, they were brought to justice, and they are serving time in American prisons. These men will always be in this, basically constitutional black hole in Guantanamo Bay or somewhere else because there's no way to prosecute them because of what the U.S. did to them. But this is only a fraction of the people left in Gitmo. There's some pretty innocent people there that are still there. A guy who pled guilty to a crime and is set to be released in March, things like that. Attempts to close the prison and transfer detainees has been met with persistent hawkish criticism. Under pressure, President Obama ultimately buckled and expanded the prison, even though he, vowed to close it that was one of the main things he vowed to do as he was running for president. To avoid meeting the same fate as his former boss, Biden is attempting a more covert route. However, it is unclear if the current administration will make closing Gitmo enough of a priority to get it done. Biden's Pentagon is already moving forward with a plan from the Donald Trump administration to build a $4 million courtroom. And so, again, Obama pledges to close the prison. He's met with so much hawkish criticism, and it's a big deal. And so he caves to political pressure and actually expands the prison rather than doing anything to close it. And Biden could easily fall in that same trap, I fear. Now, so the Biden approach is not to make a big deal out of it. I think they're going to try to probably slowly start to move people out of the prison, get the population as low as possible. Maybe it is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the 8 or 9 other people there who are real dangerous terrorist kind of people, and then find either another spot for them or some kind of weird fake legal maneuver that allows you to move them into prison somewhere else or third country or something. I don't know. So, back to the article. The Wall Street Journal reports Biden's covert approach has relegated the official dedicated to closing the facility to a lower office in the White House. The sources who spoke with the Wall Street Journal say the office was more influential during the Obama administration. Some analysts believe Biden is also concerned about looking soft. According to Harvey Rishkoff, a former head of the military commission apparatus who helped draft a recent report on closing the facility from the University of Pennsylvania Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law, said the administration doesn't want to look like it's soft on terrorism and is awaiting a political consensus. And so, look, what the Biden administration wants is for every American, or most Americans, a strong majority, right? You need a good amount of Republicans who are ready to move on from the legacy of Guantanamo Bay. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, in part because the polling I just talked about, where America's top concern is terrorism. And so I think just not because these men are I don't know, they're old. I don't know if like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, if even if you just let him go, is he gonna go back to being like, is he capable of actually doing something else against you? I really don't know. I think it's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but anyways, the 20 of the men have been cleared for release. So like, of that group, you would think that letting them go would be something, but because of how little Americans actually understand about their own foreign policy, what's going on in the world, who these men actually are, and everything like that, hots like Ted Cruz are going to be able to make a lot of hay. So while Biden may find some support for closing the prison, Senator Ted Cruz accused the president of trying to release terrorists. The Biden administration wants to free more terrorists, and we know to an absolute metaphysical certainty the result will be more Americans murdered. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. I really don't think Biden is going to just set Khalid Sheikh Mohammed free. And again, the people he's talking about releasing are people who have been cleared for release. America's just holding them because we really can't find a third country to transfer them to. It's unclear what additional court facilities will be used for, as the White House says most men will never face trial. Of the 36 remaining detainees, 20 have been cleared for release, and an additional 4 will remain indefinitely as Gitmo, as the government has no plans to prosecute these men, but views them as too much of a security threat to release. The prison at Gitmo has already been, 3 prisoners at Gitmo have all been found guilty, 2 by plea agreements. Mehdi Khan's plea agreement has his release date set for March. 9 of the remaining men are awaiting trial, including 5 accused of involvement in the September 11th attacks. So I think that's about covers everything on Gitmo. Of course, though, I think, as I was saying, really the big points here are that, we've destroyed our Constitution, our justice system with this torture program. Next article is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, titled Pentagon to investigate clandestine Pentagon involvement, looking at other countries. So give me 1 second here to get this article pulled up. All right, and we have this article here now from, again, Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Pentagon open to review of its clandestine psychological operations. The move came after a report on fake U.S. military-linked accounts were promoting a pro-Western narrative on Facebook and Twitter. The Pentagon ordered a sweeping review of how it conducts clandestine information warfare after social media sites removed fake accounts that were suspected of being linked to the U.S. military, the Washington Post reported on Monday. A report published last month by the research group Graphica and the Stanford Internet Observatory detailed the activity of fake accounts on Facebook and Twitter that were promoting a pro-Western narrative in posts targeting audiences overseas. The social media companies removed around 150 accounts over the past few years, with some removed as recently as they were promoting anti-Russian narratives on the war in Ukraine. I covered this report in the past on the show. And so the new information is, of course, that this has been linked to the DoD or the military, and that the DoD is now undergoing review. I don't really suspect that we get anything here from the DoD that is groundbreaking or that's really interesting information. But at the same time, who knows what this report turns up, and I will definitely read it when it comes out. Couple stories on Russia and China before we wrap up here. First up, Putin warns war could escalate in response to Ukrainian terrorist attacks inside Russia. Russia's President Vladimir Putin on Friday warned that Russia could escalate its war in Ukraine in response to terrorist attacks against civilian infrastructure inside Russian territory. Putin has framed his invasion as a limited special military operation that could upgrade into a full-scale war. His government recently rejected calls to mobilize for a war, but Putin signaled that there could be some sort of escalation. Indeed, we were quite restrained in our response, but that will not last forever, the Russian president said. Recently, Russian armed forces delivered a couple of sensitive blows in an area, Putin added, referring to Russian strikes on Ukrainian power infrastructure that came after Kiev's Kharkiv offensive. If the situation continues like that, our response will be more impactful. Terrorist attacks are a serious matter. Putin accused Ukraine of attempting to attack a nuclear power plant inside Russia. We have seen attempts to perpetrate attacks inside the Russian Federation, including, I'm not sure if this is made public, attempts to carry out terrorist attacks on nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants in the Russian Federation. I found it interesting that he didn't bring up the Daria Dugina situation. And so that's about all I have there. Now, on that counteroffensive, so there are reports of mass graves, at least one mass grave being found. I find that claim to be dubious for a lot of reasons at this point, and so I will address that in the future as more information comes out. Last article here on Russia, wrote by myself and Connor Freeman yesterday at the Libertarian Institute. Senate looks to enforce oil price caps with secondary sanctions. Two senators have introduced a bill that would sanction any company buying Russian oil at a price beyond a cap set by Western leaders. If passed, legislation would significantly escalate the economic war on Moscow, resulting in the U.S. sanctioning India, Turkey, and China. Price caps set the maximum amount a company or country could pay for Russian oil. The policy will be complicated to enforce as it requires Moscow and third countries to agree to oil transfers well below market prices. The idea is the brainchild of Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Yellen believes the price caps will slow the Russian economy without harming Europe. In spite of the comments' dependence on Russian energy exports, analysts have warned Russia could respond by cutting production. Analysts believe that could send prices well above $380 a barrel. The bill was introduced by Senators Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, and Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania. Van Hollen and Toomey sit on the Banking Committee, which oversees sanctions policy. The legislation directs the Treasury to target financial institutions involved in the trade, finance, insurance, reinsurance, and brokerage of Russian energy sold at above price caps. Toomey vowed to get this bill enacted as soon as possible so that Russia can no longer profit from oil sales, funding its war in Ukraine. After Russia invaded Ukraine, President Joe Biden led the West in placing sweeping sanctions on the Kremlin and promised to cripple Russia's economy. Russia has maintained its economic strength in the face of Western sanctions by finding markets in Asia. China, India, and Turkey have greatly increased their import of Russian energy over the past 6 months. Most analysts believe India and China will be unwilling to adopt price caps as they are already buying Russian oil at a discounted price, and President Vladimir Putin pledged to stop energy sales to any country that adopts the price caps. And just to add to this, on Turkey, interesting, when the U.S. pressed Turkey to sanction the MIR system, Turkey says they will only implement U.S. sanctions. I'm not sure if they are going to view the price caps as sanctions. Maybe they'll find some wiggle room there, but my guess is that Turkey does not implement the price caps. Senator Van Hollen believes the Secretary of Sanctions will act as a global backstop and finally get greater compliance with the Western economic war policies. I do think there is a benefit to having worldwide backup so that Russia does not try, as it is bound to do, to play countries against each other, the senator said. Putin may find more friends than Van Hollen realizes. Putin recently attended the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with more than a dozen other world leaders. The attendees represent over half the world's population and a quarter of its economy. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, representing the SCO's newest member, proclaimed that the more countries Washington sanctions, the easier it will be to evade the U.S. Treasury. At the conference, Turkey submitted its bid to become the body's next member. All right, two more stories here to wrap up today, and the first is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, September 18th. Biden again says the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China attacks. In an interview with 60 Minutes that aired Sunday, President Biden said the U.S. would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack, marking the fourth time during his presidency he has made the pledge despite long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity. When asked by host Scott Pelley if U.S. forces would defend Taiwan, Biden said yes if in fact there was an unprecedented attack. Pelley followed up by asking, so, unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion. The president again replied yes. When asked for comment, the White House insisted that U.S. policy hasn't changed as it did the three previous times Biden made the pledge to defend Taiwan. The president has said before, including in Tokyo earlier this year. He also made it clear that our Taiwan policy hasn't changed. That remains true, the White House spokesperson said, according to Reuters. Under the policy of strategic ambiguity, the U.S. is not supposed to say one way or another whether it would intervene to defend Taiwan from a Chinese attack. Back in 2001, then Senator Joe Biden criticized President George W. Bush for suggesting the U.S. would defend Taiwan, then later walking it back. In an op-ed for the Washington Post, Biden wrote that words matter and said that Bush hurt the credibility of the United States by making such comments due to inattention to detail. Biden rightly pointed out that in the 2021 op-ed that the U.S. hasn't been obliged to defend Taiwan since we abrogated the 1954 Mutual Defense Treaty signed by President Eisenhower and ratified by the Senate. That treaty was terminated after the U.S. formalized relations with Beijing in 1979. Since then, the U.S. hasn't had diplomatic ties with Taipei but has continued to sell arms to the island. Biden also claimed on 60 Minutes interview, which was conducted last Thursday, that the U.S. is still committed to the One China policy. We agree that we signed into law a long time ago and that there is a One China policy, and this makes Taiwan their own judges about their independence. We are not moving forward. We are not encouraging their independence. We're not. That's their decision. From Beijing's perspective, the frequent U.S. delegations to Taiwan and other support for the island are a sign that Washington is moving away from the One China policy. Congress is also working on a piece of legislation that would radically change U.S. policy towards Taiwan and enshrine that into law. The last article I have today is from myself and Connor Freeman. Yesterday at the Libertarian Institute, U.S.-Canadian warships sailed through Taiwan Strait shortly after Biden's pledge to go to war with China. U.S. and Canadian warships sailed through the Taiwan Strait, which China views as its territorial waters, on Thursday. Since U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei last month, tensions between Washington and Beijing have soared. The transit occurred just days after President Joe Biden pledged to defend Taiwan with military force against China. Over the summer, U.S. and Chinese relations deteriorated to historic lows. Pelosi's high-profile visit to Taipei and the White House's approval of new weapon sales to the island is viewed by Beijing as the White House abandoning its nearly 5 decades long one China policy. The policy states the U.S. will not have a relationship with the government in Taipei and recognizes China and Taiwan as the same country. Under one China, Washington has maintained strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan. Under this approach, the U.S. does not commit to defending or not to defending the island if China attacks. However, as I just pointed out, Joe Biden recently walked this back. Fourth time it's happened, the White House wants it back again. And as Connor points out, one of the people who were walking it back was Kurt Campbell, that's Biden's top Asia official, indicates the Harsh's remarks were not upending the decades-long policy, saying, I do not believe it is appropriate to call the remarks that came from the White House today as Biden walking back the presidential remarks. Campbell is a former CEO of the New American Security and Arms Industry and Pentagon-funded think tank. Last year, Campbell declared an era of open engagement with Beijing. The era of engagement with Beijing has come to an end. Military activity around Taiwan continued to escalate since Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. The People's Liberation Army recently conducted its first drone strike crossing the Straits, the Taiwan Straits median line, and for 50 years that served as a de facto barrier. You know, countries that China generally didn't cross that median line, but now they have been doing it a lot since Pelosi's visit. This comes amid major escalations on the Taiwan Red Line. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee recently advanced a piece of legislation that would make the island a de facto major non-NATO ally of the United States, accelerating arms transfers to Taipei and preparing a robust sanctions regime for China, and then authorizing an additional $6.5 billion in military sales for Taiwan. Under Biden, the troops are openly deployed to the island and training local forces to go to war with the mainland. So I think that is about everything I have for the show today. As I wrap up here, I just want to thank everyone, of course, for tuning in as always. More shows later in the week, and thanks everybody so much for tuning in, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone _.